Well, it turns out that Satan and one of his cohorts is walking down downtown Fredericksburg over here. Yeah, I'm sorry to say, but it happens, right? And they're actually following a guy about 50 feet behind this guy. They got an eye on him, right? And they happen to know, because they're Satan, right, that this guy's about to come into a deep realization of some spiritual truth. And the cohort is kind of hitting on Satan and going, what are you going to do to stop him from coming into this realization? Satan doesn't seem to be moved, just kind of quietly following the guy down the street. The moment's about to happen. The cohort's like, hey, what are you going to do? Doesn't do a thing. The guy comes into this deep spiritual truth. You can see it. He stops in his tracks and he's like, oh my God. And the cohort says, I told you, the guy has come into this deep truth. Now what are we going to do? He says, don't worry about it. He says, I'm going to help him organize his thoughts. Yeah. Organize his thoughts. In other words, what he's going to do with the truth. I'm going to help him see it and not in a different way. And that's kind of what we're doing today, except the reverse. See it in a different way. We're considering a scripture from the Sermon on the Mount, which is known by Bible scholars as Jesus' premier work, his tour de force, the greatest sermon that he ever preached. It's probably one of the greatest ones that he ever lessons that he ever gave. And what we're considering today is really an entrance into the idea, because he's setting up all the teachings that he's going to do. And he sets it up in a very particular way. So I want to share it with you this morning. I'm reading today from Matthew 5, verses 11 through 20. And he says, blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but it's thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all the house. And in the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law of the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. So, Jesus is here talking obviously to the people. And what he's telling them is there is a way to live that is different than what you've been taught. But it's slightly different. It's not hugely different. He's talking to people who are very interested in spirituality. And what we see in Jesus' history and his time is that he had issues with religious people. When we see Jesus angry, expressing some of his unresolved issues, if you want to say that, it's usually pointed at one of the religious peoples around him. He was very humble and loving towards the ordinary folk. But the religious people, and sometimes the disciples, but mainly the religious people, he stomps and he curses and he chews them out. And of course, the religious people had a lot of trouble with Jesus, right? You ever heard the expression, the Jews killed Jesus? You ever heard that? Well, it's kind of a crazy statement because, he lived in the Jewish community. All of his friends were Jewish, right? The society was Jewish. And of course, his enemies were Jewish too, but, It's kind of like saying the Greeks killed Socrates, right? Yeah. But, all his friends were Greek and all his enemies were Greek. The Greeks, you're not saying anything. Who did kill Jesus? The religious folk killed Jesus. They couldn't take the message. It was a little too hard. And so, as he's talking, he's telling us, as he concludes the Sermon on the Mount, as he goes through all of this, it's a wonderful study. He concludes it by saying there's basically two ways to live this out. Okay? And what he's telling us is that one way, of the two paths, one way will lead to life and one way will lead to destruction. In another section, he talks about two trees, and he says there are two trees. One will bear good fruit and one will give poison fruit. He says there are two houses. One is built on a rock and one is built upon sand. And so you might ask yourselves, well, what are the two ways? Makes sense to ask that question. What are the two ways? And traditionally, we could say, well, it's those people who obey, God's law and the people who disobey God's law. But that is not what Jesus is teaching. Very interesting and actually a little bit scary. Yeah, it's a little bit scary because what he's doing is he's talking to people who understand the spiritual principles, but he's telling them, you have lived it out in a certain way, and I'm telling you, you got to live it out in a different way. He doesn't address the people and say, there are those who obey the law and those who don't obey the law of God. He's saying, those of you who are obeying the law, you have been taught to do it in this way. But I say unto you, you got to obey in this way. Okay? He says, he's not distinguishing or contrasting people who pray and don't pray. He's saying, all of you pray, and you've been taught to pray in this way. But I say to you, you got to pray in this way. Right? He's talking to people, he's saying this, not saying, all of you are doing your best to follow the Ten Commandments, to obey the Ten Commandments. But you've been taught to obey the Ten Commandments in this way, and I say to you, you got to obey the Ten Commandments in that way. So you see, he's talking to people who are already praying, already obeying the commandments, already going to church, telling the truth, obeying the law, right? And he's telling them, right, if you don't listen to what I'm saying, it's really poison or disaster. So you kind of need to wake up, is kind of what he's saying. And of course, that message was very difficult for the Jewish leadership to hear at the time. And we know what ended up happening. But what he's doing is he's not contrasting between good and bad, you see. He's not contrasting between good and bad. All of these people are in the kingdom. Listen to the scripture. If you listen to verse 19, he said, therefore those who break these are the least, who break the commandments are the least in the kingdom. But if you do them, you're the greatest in the kingdom. But everybody's in the kingdom. There's nobody who's out. Everybody's in the kingdom. That's what's important here. So he's telling us that this is a very, very interesting and very important distinction that you need to listen to. And frankly, it's scary. Because all of us pray. All of us do our best to be good people. All of us are trying to follow God's law to the best of our ability. And yet Jesus tells us, if you're not doing it the right way, it could be disastrous. It's poison. A little dramatic, but he's getting the point. And actually, he's really got an idea. Our co-founder, Charles Fillmore, when he came up with this whole unity philosophy theology, he had no intention of creating a new spiritual movement or religion or a sect or whatever you want to call it. What he wanted to do was to inform the current religious consciousness with a new idea. He wanted to inject the idea of oneness into current religious thinking. And his strategy for doing this was not to set up unity churches. His strategy was, let's have study groups in the basement of traditional churches. Let's take a Baptist church, for example. He says we're going to have study groups in the basement of Baptist churches, and we're going to study oneness principles. And the power of that truth will be so strong that it will inform or infuse the rest of the congregation. And pretty soon, those Baptists will become oneness thinkers. Their philosophy, their theology will evolve, will move forward. His strategy didn't work. It failed completely. Right? It failed so completely that people ended up saying, well, let's do our own thing. Let's just do our own unity thing. Okay? And actually, I think that Jesus had the same intention. I don't think he ever set out to say, hey, let's set up a new religion called Christianity. I don't think he ever wanted to propose that. I think what he wanted to do was inform the Jewish religion culture. You've done it this way. We need to do it this way. This is going to be better. It's going to be deeper. It's going to be great. Let's go for it. Let's change. So they couldn't do it. In fact, they couldn't do it so badly they had to crucify him, right? Rub him out. But, we couldn't do it. Unity people couldn't do it in the Fillmore day. So what we're looking at here is our attachment, our resistance to this important, subtle change that Jesus is calling us to. So let's just recognize that. We're not going to separate ourselves. We're not going to say, oh yeah, we can handle it. We can because we're in this oneness idea now. But let's recognize that traditionally we have this. So let us explore how it is that we can come into this oneness consciousness that Jesus is inspiring us towards. We're going to talk about 4 different issues. We're going to see about how it can be brighter, how we're called to be brighter, how we're called to be deeper, how we're called to be sweeter, and how we're called to go higher. Okay? Brighter, deeper, sweeter, and higher. Let's start with brighter. What does he say? You're the light of the world. Let your light shine. Nobody turns on a lamp and puts it under a bushel. You need to put it on top of the table. In other words, the light is intended to dispel the darkness. If you want to say it in a poetic kind of way, the light is to face the darkness and say, you have no power over me. Boom, here's the light. Darkness is gone. It needs to face the darkness and overcome it, you see. What he's calling us to do is a relationship with the world in which we need to let our light shine. In other words, we need to stand upon our truth and let that truth shine. In our men's group last week, we talked about warrior consciousness. And we talked about what it means to be a spiritual warrior and to stand upon our truth, sometimes in the face of difficulty, and stand in love, but very strongly, facing and sharing our truth, establishing what we know to be right. In other words, not hiding that light under a bushel very timidly. Oh God, I got the light, but don't let anybody see it. He's calling us to be the light in the family we're in the work we're in the community we're in. Wherever we see darkness, we're called to step forth and take action. And in that group I shared, I was remembering in Costa Rica, it was brought to my attention that a gentleman there was exhibiting predator consciousness. He was chasing ladies in the congregation, getting into relationship, then breaking off the relationship. And of course, the women were embarrassed or guilty or shameful or whatever, and they never came back. And he was doing this over again, and I hadn't even noticed it until it was brought to my attention. I had to face the guy and say, look, I've noticed this behavior. Got to let my light shine. Can't let that happen. Unity is supposed to be a safe space. We need to address it. We need to confront it. I said, I've noticed this behavior, and we can't have that here. This is a safe space. You're free to come, But do not. And he says, okay. And it stopped. But then it started again. And I said, I'm sorry, but we just can't welcome you here anymore. And that's hard. As a minister, that's hard. It's hard to do. But you got to let your light shine, okay? So how else are we going to be brighter? He says, you are the salt. What is salt all about? You know, in the old days, meat, right? You need to preserve meat. You put salt on it because if you don't, it decays. It falls apart. So you put salt on it so it doesn't fall apart. So you're in your neighborhood, you're in your community, you're in your family. You see something falling apart, you're the salt. You come in there to preserve. You're supposed to do something, take action, let your light shine. And salt is also to enhance taste. You know, I love eating corn on the cob with salt on it. Yeah. But after I finish eating the corn on the cob, I don't say, boy, that was good salt. What I say is, that's good corn. The salt enhanced the experience. So if you go to your small group and everybody comes out of the group going, boy, that guy, he's really smart. He really knows his stuff. Showed me up. He knows everything. God, he's awesome. Not salt. Ego. You come out of the group and everybody's saying, that was a great group meeting. That's salt. Right? So brighter. We need to be brighter. Jesus is also calling us to go deeper. And he's telling us we need to go to the heart. We need to be willing to change the heart. He's talking about people who choose to live their spiritual principles on the outside, but not take them onto the inside. And he's challenging all of us to live from the inside out. Right? And so he says things like, you have heard it said, do not kill. And that's fine, you know. Going out and killing somebody is not a good thing. But I say unto you, if you despise somebody, if you have ill will towards them, if you think negatively toward them, you've killed them in your heart. Talks about sex. You've heard it said, do not commit adultery. And, you know, the way I think Jesus was framing it is like, if you want to be in a sexual relationship with somebody and not be married, I think what he was talking about was no commitment, no deep heart connection. When you want to have sex with somebody but not be involved with them, you're saying something like, I want to give you my body, but I don't want to give you my heart. I want you to give me your body, but I don't want your heart. And so Jesus is saying, you're creating separation. But I say unto you, if you engage in that, it's lust. And lust is a state of separation from your heart, from your spirit to your body. Not favorable to you. Not conducive to your highest expression. And so he's saying, even if you think about it, even if you fantasize about it, you've committed adultery. Take a deep breath. Tell the truth. You've heard it said, if you sign a contract, if you make an oath, you better fulfill that oath. Because otherwise, lawyers is going to come in and you're going to have big problems. You're going to get sued. But I say unto you, let your yes be yes and your no be no. In other words, be impeccable with your word. If you're going to say yes, then mean yes, no matter what it is, big or small. It's not about signing a contract or lawyers coming after you. It's being in integrity with yourself. Say no and mean it. Say yes and mean it. Be in integrity with who you are. None of this wishy-washy kind of thing. You see, but I say unto you, say yes or no. Turn the other cheek. You remember that? It says, well, turn the other cheek. It's not about getting retaliation. Don't retaliate. Don't go hit somebody else on the cheek if somebody hits you. It's not just about that. Okay, that's fine. You can do that. Don't go hit anybody. All right, that's good. But if somebody hits you on the cheek, turn the other cheek. Because you have a hope of a relationship with this person. Your hope is that one day that person will kiss the other cheek. Jesus is telling us, if somebody has done you wrong, no matter how grievous that wrong is, how bad that wrong is, what you need to do is have hope in your heart for that relationship. You need to do your forgiveness work. You need to release that. And if you need to confront that person or you need to oppose that person because of their actions, you do it in a consciousness of love. I feel like the smoke of some burning soot right now. I don't know about you. I feel like nothing. That's why I say this is scary. But I know I'm speaking truth that all of you know. Jesus is wanting us to live from the inside out. He's wanting us to do our work every time. Jesus is not telling us here is good and bad. All of this is good. Not hitting somebody, right? Not just sleeping with somebody. But go deeper. Live it from the inside. Live in integrity with yourself. And so these are the ones in which the kingdom of heaven are set up for. So as I said, Jesus wants us to change our heart. Look at it this way. Let's talk about lying. If we have two people, somebody who's not particularly religious, let's call him a worldly person, and a religious person who lives their religiosity on the outside. Okay? Let's just, those two people. Somebody in the world, why would they lie? Well, there's fear and there's pride, I would say, just to simplify. Fear because if you don't lie, you're going to lose something. Somebody's going to see something that you don't want them to see. You're afraid of something, some fear, something you're protecting. Okay, that's why you would lie. Also, you might lie because you feel like you're sort of smarter than everybody else and you can pull a one over them, pull the wool over their eyes, and you have some pride about that. So you got a little ego rush. Oh, I can pull this off kind of thing, right? That's why I might lie. Fear and pride. Well, if you're a very religious person, you might not lie because you're afraid that God is going to smite you. Right? Because that's what they've said. Don't lie. So, oh God, I better not lie because God's going to get me. So I'm afraid of God getting me, so I better not lie. And also pride. Well, I'm not going to lie because, I'm not like those people. Those liars. Right? Puff myself up, a lot of spiritual pride here. Right? I'm not like them. So worldly person, fear and pride. Outer religious person, fear and pride. And Jesus is saying, what's the difference? Same thing. But if you come into a oneness consciousness and the thought comes of lying, if you're really in that oneness, you say, I'm going to lie. If you just, take a pause and really look at it. Say, why? Because I'm afraid. Well, what am I afraid of? I'm going to lose something. I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm going to say a truth that nobody wants to hear. But if I'm in oneness consciousness, you say that fear has no power over me. That fear's got no control over me. I got nothing to hide. I am. God is. So why lie? Nothing to fear. And pride? You're in oneness consciousness. There's nothing to be proud over. It's God is. I am. The thought of lying doesn't even go there. And if you're seeking to live oneness consciousness and you find yourself lying, then you know you've descended into that outer spirituality kind of thing. Right? You just come home again. You come home again. That's what Jesus is teaching us. All right, so brighter, deeper, sweeter. Ooh, this is good. Jesus does not say, act like this and God will become your Father. In other words, your behavior is going to inspire God to do something for you. Jesus is saying, God is already your Father. You are already a child of God. There is nothing that you need to do to be that. So if you're living in outer religiosity, what you're trying to do is bring value. You're going to demonstrate that you're valuable to yourself and to God so that, you'll be blessed in some way. I'm good, I'm valuable, I'm worthy. So bless me, God, because I'm worthy. See all the good things I've done. You see how wrong that is? When you come into a consciousness of oneness, it's, I do good because I am good. Because I choose to do good. I'm not expecting anything in return, you see. We're not about pleasing God in any way. If God was your boss and you did something wrong, you get fired. But if you're a child of God, any behavior you have, it doesn't matter. You're always going to be a child. You're always going to be a child of your mother and father. It's never going to change no matter what you do. It's the same thing, okay? Father. And the reason I say sweeter is because there's a sweetness in that connection of oneness. You come into that, I am. And it's sweet because it feels, it vibrates, it knows. There's a consciousness that's established. There's a perimeter that's established that's a loving thing, a connecting thing. It's a vibratory state, and it's sweet. So Jesus is calling us to be sweeter. And then he's calling us to come up higher. Again, Jesus is telling us the whole key to living the truth that I'm teaching you is to know God as your Father. Not just like we did last week. Father, first in the Trinity. God, Son, Holy Spirit. God, the Father, and I are one. Jesus said here in the scripture I read to you, you might think of all this, well, Jesus has come to abolish the law. He says, I haven't come to abolish the law. I've come to fulfill it. I've come to fulfill it. And the fulfillment of the law is to come into this oneness consciousness where you live from the inside out. That's the fulfillment of the law. The Pharisees that he's quoting here, he's telling them, you got to be more righteous than the Pharisees. Well, the Pharisees had something like 635 laws that they had to fulfill in one day. And their life was all about living the day, trying to check off all of those laws, see if they could make it in one day. So if you say somebody, you got to be more righteous than the Pharisees, somebody goes, oh my God, more than 635 things, it's not humanly possible. But Jesus says it's not about those laws. It's about coming into one consciousness, one path, one house, one tree. That's it. Oneness. And that fulfills the law. So if you find yourself looking for worth, looking for wealth, looking for recognition, because you have those needs, you're working an outer-based spirituality. Jesus wants us to come home, to come in, to know that God and I are one. Fulfillment of the law, said simply, the Father and I are one. Bam. That's it. God and I are one. Love and I are one. Principle and I are one. Life and I are one. Whatever it is, we're one. We surrender into that consciousness and it's all resolved. And this is why Jesus in the Course in Miracles says of the crucifixion, it's the last useless journey, meaningless journey. What was it, useless or meaningless? Whatever, meaningless. Why meaningless? Because all that intent to kill, nothing really happened. Death is not real. Life goes on. I resurrected. So you didn't do anything to me. And all that suffering that you perceived on the cross, no purpose at all. Had no purpose because nothing happened. Last useless journey. So you feel you're being crucified? You feel that you're suffering? You feel that you're less than? Useless journey. Come home. Come into the heart. Come into the truth of God is and I am. And you'll get off the cross. You'll resurrect. You'll find your heart. You'll find your life. You'll find your love. That's fulfilling the law, you see. You've heard it said, but I say unto you. Amen. Thank you, Father.